All right. Good afternoon. It's early enough. It is. So far, anyway. Our Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed is in Cape Town in the Republic of South Africa, representing the Secretary General at the G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting. She also attended the Finance in Common Summit of the National Development Banks. In her remarks, Ms. Mohammed conveyed the UN support for South Africa's G20 presidency and stressed the importance of G20 actions to shepherd the global economy and improve prospects for sustainable development. She called for proactive steps to support developing countries overwhelmed by debt service to expand the development finance and to create a stronger global financial safety net that protects all countries. She also stressed the need for strengthening tax systems and making them fairer and more efficient. Ms. Mohammed also met with ministers and principals of international financial institutions and development banks ahead of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development that will take place in Sevilla, in Spain, in July. And she will be back in New York tomorrow. Other travel to flag, Undersecretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the head of peace operations, will be traveling to the Democratic Republic of the Congo from tomorrow until March 1st. He will first go to Kinshasa, where he will engage with Congolese authorities as well as international partners to discuss the ongoing situation in the eastern part of the country and the next steps in implementing Resolution 2773, which was adopted last week. He will then head to the east and travel to Beni in North Kivu, where he will engage with provincial authorities as well as with the newly appointed force commander of the peacekeeping force, Lieutenant General Ulysse de Mesquita Gomes, and as well, of course, as the peacekeepers deployed in the Beni area. He will be there to assess firsthand recent developments, and he will also visit a number of UN peacekeeping positions. On March 1st, he will go to Entebbe in Uganda, and he'll pay a visit to the MONUSCO personnel who was evacuated to Uganda from Goma last month following the advance of the M23. And as we mentioned, Mr. Lacroix is currently wrapping up his visit to New Delhi in India, where he attended an international conference on women, peace, and security, hosted by the government of India to address barriers and discuss solutions to women's participation in peacekeeping efforts. While in India, Mr. Lacroix also discussed the future of peacekeeping with Indian senior government officials and visited the National War Memorial. Staying in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our humanitarian affairs colleagues say they're alarmed by escalating violence and insecurity in recent days in the town of Uvira, about 100 kilometers south of South Kivu's provincial capital, Bukavu. Clashes and rising violence in Uvira put local communities and humanitarian workers in extreme danger, with our humanitarian partners reporting multiple incidents of looting and sexual violence. Elsewhere in South Kivu, humanitarian assessments over the last 10 days indicate that more than 10,000 displaced people have returned from Ijiwi Island in Lake Kivu due to dire conditions there. They are returned to villages in the areas of Minova and Kalehe. More than 100,000 people have fled to the island since late January. Our partners also report that people have been returning to parts of North Kivu, where recent assessment found that 80,000 people have returned to villages in the territory of Masisi, about 80 kilometers northwest of Goma. Infrastructure in these villages was largely destroyed by recent fighting, and returnees urgently need humanitarian assistance. Ongoing clashes in Masisi also expose people to risks of violence and rights violations. For its part, our colleagues at the UN Children's Fund said today that they're deeply worried about the significant increase in reports of grave violations committed against children in parts of the eastern DRC. They say the number of incidents has tripled since the end of January. The data collected reveals that cases of sexual violence have risen by more than 2.5 times. Abductions have increased 6-fold. Killing and maiming is up 7-fold. And attacks on schools and hospitals has multiplied by 12. Finally, in Ituri province, our humanitarian partners also report that violence is on the rise in the territory of Jugu, where attacks by armed men killed 8 civilians, with 2 people abducted between the 21st and 23rd of February. insecurity in the area has forced at least 17,000 men, women, and children to flee their homes, and our humanitarian partners have had to suspend the delivery of assistance to some 45,000 people. Turning to the situation in Gaza, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that we and our partners continue to provide more aid to people in need, including in previously inaccessible areas. Our health partners are scaling up support to health facilities across Gaza to restore essential services and boost capacity. They've also distributed medical supplies to some 1.8 million people, including kits for trauma and emergency care, primary health care, non-communicable diseases, sexual and reproductive health, maternal care in children, as well as dignity kits and nutrition supplements. Another national emergency medical teams of 52 Palestinian doctors and surgeons have recently deployed to Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah and at the European Gaza and Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis to enhance surgical capacity. We've been telling you about the polio campaign, which as of yesterday have reached 99% of the children targeted, bringing the total number of children vaccinated to 586,000 people. Meanwhile, our shelter partners continue to distribute emergency shelter materials and other items to displaced families since the ceasefire. Our partners have provided more than 27,000 bedding kits and 619,000 blankets and 122,000 mattresses and 129,000 items of clothing. On the waterfront and sanitation, our partners report that since the start of the ceasefire, the production of water has more than doubled. This is due to increased fuel availability and basic emergency repairs. In addition, solid waste management is scaling up to further mitigate public health risks. However, the total volume of water produced and supplied still stands at about a third of the water that was being provided and produced before October 7th, 2023. OCHA stresses that sustaining the ceasefire is vital to continuing to scale up our response and to prevent further loss of life and human suffering. All member states must leverage their influence to ensure that the ceasefire holds. On the West Bank, I just wanted to flag a statement from Mr. Lazzarini, head of UNRWA, who said that more than 50 people, including children, reportedly killed since the Israeli forces' operation started 5 weeks ago in the West Bank. Destruction of public infrastructure, bulldozing of roads, and access restrictions seem to be commonplace now. Adding that about 40,000 people have been forced to flee their homes, especially from refugee camps in the north. Yesterday, there was a 14-hour raid by Israeli forces in Nablus, resulting in yet another fatality and multiple injuries. During the operation, Israeli forces closed checkpoints around Nablus, leaving people stranded for several hours. We reiterate that in law enforcement, the use of potentially lethal force may only be used when strictly unavoidable to protect life and prevent serious injury. I would also urge you to take a look at Volker Turk's statement that he delivered today in Geneva on the issue of accountability for war crimes, potential war crimes in Gaza. Back here, Edemur Sornu, the Director of Operations and Advocacy at OCHA, briefed Security Council members in an open meeting on Sudan. She said that in several parts of the country, the already catastrophic situation of civilians has worsened since her last briefing to the Council, and that was just less than 1 month ago. Focusing on the latest alarming developments and violence in North Darfur, including in Zamzam displacement camp, as well as the situation in Khartoum and in the south of Sudan, Ms. Wasornu warned that the scale of needs in Sudan is unprecedented and requires an equally unprecedented mobilization of international support. The Secretary General's personal envoy, Ramtam Lamamra, also briefed the Security Council, but in close consultations. And just a bit of zooming in on the horrors and catastrophe in Sudan. Due to the escalating violence in Zamzam camp, our colleagues at the World Food Program tell us they've had no choice but to suspend the voucher-based food assistance system in place in the camp. The recent violence left Zamzam's central market destroyed by shelling, pushing residents of the camp, which is about 500,000 human beings, further away from accessing essential food supplies. In a statement, World Food Programme said that over the past 2 weeks, the violence has compelled its partners on the ground to evacuate their staff for safety. As you know, famine conditions were confirmed in Zamzam last August. Since then, the World Food Programme has managed to transport just one convoy of humanitarian supplies into the camp, despite repeated attempts to deliver more. And now, World Food Programme is telling us that without immediate assistance, thousands of desperate families in Zamzam could starve in the coming weeks. These food vouchers allowed families to purchase essential food supplies such as cereal, pulses, oil, and salt directly from the local markets, which WFP helps to keep stocked through its local private sector retail network. We continue to reiterate that civilians in Zamzam and elsewhere must be protected, whether they choose to stay or voluntarily move for safety reasons. Turning to Somalia, we are warning about a deteriorating food security situation in the country. The latest report from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPC system analysis, shows that 1 million more people will face crisis levels of food insecurity in the coming months. This is due to the worsening drought conditions, to conflict, and to high food prices. Some 3.4 million men, women, and children are already experiencing crisis levels of hunger, but this figure is expected to rise to 4.4 million men, women, and children, or nearly a quarter of the population between April and June, when below-average rains are forecasted. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that some 1.7 million children under the age of 5 are expected to suffer from acute malnutrition this year and will need urgent treatment. Of these children, more than 460,000 of them are expected to suffer from severe malnutrition. The federal government of Somalia and UN agencies jointly warn that without swift funding for humanitarian action, millions could once again face deepening hunger in the country. In 2022, Somalia was pushed to the brink of famine by severe drought. This year, about one-third of Somalia's population, nearly 6 million people, need humanitarian assistance. But the $1.42 billion humanitarian appeal is just 12% funded, which means we only have $176 million in the bank. On Syria, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that movement of trucks carrying humanitarian assistance from Turkey to Idlib through Bab al-Hawa border crossing is continuing. Yesterday, 43 trucks carrying more than 1,000 metric tons of food from WFP, as well as blankets, solar lamps, and other items provided by the International Organization for Migration, cross borders. Our colleagues say that since the start of the year, nearly 400 trucks have crossed from Turkey into Syria, 5 times the number of trucks as the same time last year. Furthermore, across the country, our partners are supporting the rehabilitation of homes, infrastructure, schools, and roads. In northwest Syria, 350 homes have been rehabilitated since last month, and in Damascus and its rural surroundings, more than 700 people have received support in repairing their homes. Over the past 2 weeks, 3 water stations have been restored in Latakia. We and our partners continue to provide this assistance as security, logistical, and funding conditions permit. However, the toll and destruction remains overwhelming. In Aleppo, 34 facilities in former frontline areas have sustained damage or destruction and require immediate rehabilitation to restore essential services. Meanwhile, hostilities in different parts of the country are impacting civilians and humanitarian access to people in need. In eastern Aleppo, including in the vicinity of the Tishreen Dam and the Al-Khafsa water pumping station, and in the south of the country, hostilities have resulted in casualties as well as restrictions in humanitarian access and movements of people. And just a quick note from the Central African Republic, the UN peacekeeping mission there, MINUSCA, today announced the establishment of a temporary operating base in Mingala in Baskoto Prefecture, where civilian population have been facing the threat of armed groups. As part of its mandate to protect civilians, the mission said peacekeepers are engaging with local authorities, community leaders, and residents to assess the security situation to provide a response. And today, this week, if you were thinking of committing a crime at the UN, is not the week to do so because it is Police Week. Yay! The 19th UN Police Week. Leaders, and you will see a lot of uniformed police officers from all sorts of countries walk in the halls. Leaders of the UN police components from 7 peacekeeping missions, special political missions, and regional offices are gathering here for their annual meeting and to engage with senior UN officials to discuss current challenges and to set priorities for the year ahead. They're also scheduled to brief the Security Council tomorrow afternoon. In the coming days, our police colleagues will also have interactive discussions with on the contributions of UN police to the implementation of the Pact of the Future, as well as the future of UN policing. Key topics include data-driven and tech-enabled policing, along with gender-responsive policing, enhanced integrated planning, and interoperability with military and civilian elements in the field. Senor Gabriel, please.
I do not have any popular books that were on any bestseller lists.
I know, but your live interventions are all Emmy-worthy.
Congratulations again. Thank you, Steph. I wanted to ask you about Sudan and the Zamzam camp.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about it there, but I just wanted to ask, is the program, the suspension of the voucher-based food program has been suspended, but does the WFP continue to work in other capacities in the Zamzam?
No, I mean, its main partner, which was handling the program, is no longer there. WFP is not there present directly. It is there through local partners. You know, and we keep talking about Zamzam, but Zamzam is so emblematic of the horrors of Sudan, of the lack of political will from the leaders to put the interest of their people first and foremost.
And it must have been considering that famine conditions have been confirmed in Zamzam, it must have been a pretty difficult decision to halt this WFP program, given the conditions.
It must have been a harrowing decision to take for those who had to take it. But we also need to be very concerned about the safety of our own staff, and who can then go back as soon as conditions permit it. Deji.
Hi, Steph. You just mentioned about the situation in Syria, but you didn't mention the Israeli bombing in southern Syria. Does the Secretary General have anything to say about that?
I mean, we're obviously very concerned about the continuing violation by Israel of Syria's sovereignty and its territorial integrity, and of course, and the violations of the 1974 disengagement of forces agreement. All obligations under international law must be respected, and we're also, of course, you know, every time you see these strikes and other violations by others of Syria's territorial integrity, it just increases the risk of renewed violence, increased violence, and regional instability.
Before this, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he hopes that southern Syria could be demilitarized for the security of Israel. But who is for the security of Syria?
Well, we stand for the security of the Syrian people. We stand for the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Syria. These are messages that Mr. Pedersen and others have communicated, and they are agreements, right? Notably, the disengagement agreement from '74 between Israel and Syria, and it must be respected.
So Mr. Pedersen is still in Damascus?
That's my understanding, yes, sir. Edie and then Volodymyr.
Thank you, Steph. A couple of follow-ups. Can we get an update from Mr. Lamamra on his efforts to restart negotiations between the RSF and the Sudanese government?
Yeah, I mean, he's continuing his engagements with the parties. I mean, that's the general tone of his briefing to the Security Council, trying to ensure that all the various efforts done, whether it's more on the Arab League end or the African Union, including with the EU, are all well coordinated. And I think he and other envoys on this are all hopefully working in the same direction.
but can we actually get some kind
from
of
him?
statement
Yes, ma'am.
that says that whether
Beyond
he's
me.
making any headway?
I mean, listen, he's continuing to work. I think the headway and the decisions to solve this conflict will have to be made by the parties, and they will have to be moving in the right direction. And I think what's also important is that all those who have influence on the parties outside of Sudan or who may be involved in the conflict also work towards putting the interests of the Sudanese people first and foremost.
And on another subject, yesterday you said that there was difficulty getting tents into Gaza. Today you were talking about a lot of shelter materials getting in. What's the status of tents? Has that changed?
I mean, we've gotten quite a lot of tents in. We need more. What I can tell you is that we're very focused on ensuring that we have no tents in our warehouse, meaning that any tent that gets into Gaza is almost immediately distributed. We've seen the cold weather. We don't want to be in a situation where we haven't distributed everything that we've had in terms of tents. And my understanding from the case is that we have distributed all the tents that we have. We're trying to get more in.
And a third quick thing, on the M23 offensive, is there an update on where that offensive is actually heading, or has it stopped?
My understanding is that the movements and insecurity is ongoing. Volodymyr, then Michelle, and then we'll go to that side of the room.
Thank you, Stéphane. Last night, a Russian attack killed my colleague from the National News Agency of Ukraine, Ukrinform, journalist Tatiana Kulik and her husband, a well-known surgeon Pavlo Ivanchov. A Russian drone hit their house in the Bucha district near Kiev, the same Bucha. Do you have any comment on this, and do you see any signs of Russia's desire to end this war?
Well, first of all, we send our deepest condolences to you, to your colleagues, and to the family. This is yet another example of the ultimate price that journalists have paid in covering the Ukraine conflict and covering conflicts around the world. We take these things very seriously. Every killing of a journalist is condemned without reservation from us. As for your second question, what we are seeing is that the fighting is continuing. What we continue to want to see is an end to this conflict in a just peace, a sustainable peace, in line with all of the resolutions and international law, as we've often stated. Michelle.
Thanks, Steph. There's currently a now deadly measles outbreak in the United States, the UN host country. Could you remind us of the UN stance on vaccines?
We believe in the efficacy of vaccines, notably against preventable childhood diseases. Yvonne, then Ibtisam, then Evelyn.
Thanks, Stéphane. Did you say, just to follow up, did you say 40,000 people in the West Bank have been displaced
Yes, ma'am.
in the past 5 weeks?
Yep.
50 children have been killed. Is that right?
That's what I believe, that's what I
And
said, yeah.
how concerned now is the Secretary General that this situation could escalate to, what has been seen in Gaza?
Extremely, and I think I expressed it on behalf of the Secretary General a few days ago. The level of violence that we're seeing in the West Bank, the level of destruction of civilian infrastructure, of roads, of access to electricity is staggering and is extremely worrying. We're also seeing an impact on schools. A number of the UN-run schools are no longer able to work in as they should, and our colleagues are trying to find workaround systems to ensure that children have access to some sort of educational material. But we're very, very worried, and we've conveyed those concerns publicly and privately.
Okay, I have two other questions. Is that all right?
Why should you be different than anybody else, Yvonne?
Yesterday, the Uyghur language scholar Abduweli Ayub was cancelled at the last minute from a UNESCO conference at UNESCO headquarters celebrating indigenous languages. In fact, the Mother Language Day that you told us about on Monday. Is this a sign that UNESCO is bowing to pressure from China to silence Uyghur activists?
I had not heard of this particular incident. I would look into it, but I would also encourage you to ask UNESCO.
I have asked UNESCO.
Okay,
and received
I
a
will look
response.
into it. This is the first I've heard of it.
Okay. And I also have a question closer to home here at the UN HQ. I've spoken to you before about problems that we face as television reporters here, and the obstacles we face, particularly from the security here. On Monday, I witnessed a TV reporter having their live broadcast, purposefully interrupted by a security guard just outside the stakeout here. This has happened to me in the past, as I've told you. Does the Secretary General, at a time when press freedom is under attack all over the world, can the Secretary General at least guarantee our freedoms here at United Nations
I mean, I
headquarters?
will look into this case. We want you to be able to broadcast and work from here and ask questions, but let me look into the case as
Thanks.
well. Ibtisam.
Thank you. My first question is about, I don't know if you saw the video that was posted on social media by President Trump, that seen by many Palestinians and others as whitewashing, ethnic cleansing, and to say the least. Do you have any comments on that video?
Look, I've seen the video. I can tell you that we will continue to stand and to speak out against the forced displacements of Palestinians in Gaza, against anything that would lead to ethnic cleansing, and we will continue to do so very publicly.
I have another question. The Guardian wrote, and actually many other outlets reported about recently that there's at least 160 Gazans medics in Israeli prisons. And I have asked you also about Abu Safiyy's case, and I know that he was able to see a lawyer, and his lawyer reported also, or his family reported that he was a subject of torture. So two questions. One, if you have any comments, and if the UN can confirm some of these numbers, and if you also somebody from the UN was able to contact Abu Safiyya or get...
Okay, let me take it backwards. I will check on your last question. I don't know off the top of my head. We are, of course, very concerned about the people, Palestinians, who remain in so-called administrative detention, especially the medics. Our human rights colleagues have received some harrowing reports from Palestinians who've been released, talking about degrading treatment, physical abuse, showing signs of physical abuse, and all of these things are completely unacceptable. Sinan, please, and then Evelyn, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Steph. I think I asked you this question yesterday, but I have kind of more information. I need to ask you again. As I said yesterday, in Syria, the National Dialogue Conference held in Damascus, and a lot of minorities were not invited. And I just said the Kurds, actually, I found out Jerseys, some other minorities were not invited as well, and that's a big critics for the National Dialogue. And do you have any comment on that, and what can you say about that?
Sure. I mean, we understand from the statements made by the organizers of the dialogue that the de facto authorities in the Northeast were not represented in the national dialogue. Mr. Pedersen and all of us continue to stress the need for diplomatic solutions to the issues in the Northeast, and the importance of compromise for all concerned, and the importance of inclusivity in designing the future of Syria, its institutions, its constitutions, its culture. Everyone who is a Syrian should feel included, regardless of their ethnicity or their religion. Evelyn.
Thank you. The UAE, the UAE has been supporting the RSF in Syria. Do you know? Sorry, it's wrong country. I'm listening to you. 6 things at once. In Sudan, has the UN spoken to the UAE? And secondly, do you know if it's involved in Darfur?
We have been very clear and raising the alarm about the foreign involvement within the Sudan conflict, which is not positive in any way and keeps fueling the conflict. Okay. Thank you all. Enjoy the day. And I need my picture with Ibtisam now.